The wind was cold and sharp as it blew across the dead land, covering everything in white. The snow had no mercy. It swallowed trees, metal, and memories. Alike the sky was gray, the air silent, only broken by the slow crunch of boots walking through the deep snow. A man named Jake walked alone, carrying a metal detector on his back and a blaster on his side. His face was covered with a scarf, his eyes tired and alert. He was a scavenger searching old buildings for broken tech or food or anything he could trade in town. He had done this for years, since the colony on this planet fallen. Most humans left, only a few, like Jake, stayed behind, making a living from what was left. Jake moved toward an old wooden cabin half buried under snow. It looked weak, as if one hard push would break it. He stepped onto the porch and opened the door carefully. The hinges creaked, a sound too loud in the silence. Walked inside. Dust and ice covered everything, but there was something else too, something strange. The room was not empty. In the far corner, near a broken fireplace, sat two figures, small and still, one big and one small, huddled together under a thin cloth. Their skin was not like his. It was pale, almost silver, with light blue patterns glowing faintly. Jake froze, his hand on his blaster, ready. His heart beat fast. He had never seen one in real life, only in photos from the war aliens from the Arvan race. Some called them monsters, others called them victims. The bigger one raised her hand slowly. She was shaking, not from fear, but from cold. Her voice was soft and broken. "We just want a warm meal, please." Jake did not move for a second, his mind racing. They were barefoot, their feet red from cold. The child pressed close to her mother, looking at Jake with wide, tired eyes. He lowered his blaster, but stayed near the door. "How did you get here?" he asked, his voice rough from the dry air. "Our ship crashed weeks ago. The mother said we hid from soldiers and walked through the snow. We found this place. We thought no one lived here." Jake looked at the child again. She was breathing fast, her lips blue. She looked close to fainting. "Why should I trust you?" he asked again. "We are not soldiers. We are not here to harm," she said. "I swear we are only trying to survive." Jake thought for a moment. Then he took off his gloves and moved to the fireplace. He dropped some wood from his bag, lit it with his pocket spark, and the fire came to life. Slow and warm. The mother whispered something in her language and held her daughter close, moving her near the fire. The child reached out her tiny hands and smiled weakly. Jake pulled out an old food pack from his coat and handed it to the mother. She took it slowly, with both hands, nodding in thanks. "Where are the others?" Jake asked. "Your people dead or taken?" she replied softly. "We were running from them, our own kind who joined the war, who became hunters." Jake sat on a broken chair across from them. He watched their faces, not alien enough to fear, not human enough to trust. The room became quiet again. Only the fire crackled and the snow hit the walls outside. The child spoke suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "You have kind eyes." Jake looked away, not knowing what to say. The mother smiled just a little for the first time in days, maybe in weeks. Outside, something moved, a shadow across the window, fast and silent. Jake stood up quickly and walked to the door. He opened it and looked into the white. Nothing, no sound, no sign, just snow falling heavy and slow. He turned to go back inside when a loud sound made him freeze. It was the child. She had collapsed on the wooden floor, her tiny frame shaking, her eyes half open. Jake rushed forward and lifted her gently, his arms stronger than they looked. He placed her near the fire, wrapped her with a thick old coat. The mother was crying silently, her hand on her daughter's face. Jake checked the child's pulse, still alive but weak. "She needs warmth and food," he said. "She won't last long." The mother nodded. She said, "I will give you anything, just help Harry." "Don't need anything," Jake replied. "I just didn't want to see someone die today." The fire grew stronger, lighting the room in a soft orange glow. The child opened her eyes for a moment and smiled before falling asleep. Again, Jake sat back watching them, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Then, from deep in the snow outside came a soft sound, not wind, not animal, something else. Jake stood again, his hand near his blaster, and far beyond the cabin, deep in the snow, something watched with eyes that did not blink. The fire burned low but warm inside the old cabin. Shadows danced across broken walls and frozen glass outside. The snow kept falling, covering the world in silence, while inside 3 souls sat close to the only warmth left on this cold, forgotten planet. Jake looked at the little alien girl sleeping wrapped in his old coat. Her face was calm now, but pale and thin. Her tiny hands clutched a soft piece of cloth, her only possession, something she held like it was life itself. Her mother sat beside her, eyes half closed from tiredness and cold. She held her daughter's hand as if letting go would end everything. She had not spoken since the girl collapsed, only whispered words in a language Jake did not understand. Soft and full of fear, Jake took a breath, slow and quiet. He reached into his bag and pulled out another food pack. The kind made for soldiers, dry and boring, but full of energy. He placed it near the fire, then looked at the woman. "You should eat," he said gently. "Your daughter will need you strong." She nodded slowly, but did not move. Her eyes stayed on her child. Jake opened the food pack, poured the warm mix into a small metal cup, and pushed it toward her. Without a word, she took it in both hands, her fingers shaking, but she drank every drop like it was gold. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above the sound of the fire. "You did not have to help us. You could have left us outside to freeze." Jake did not answer right away. His eyes looked far past the walls, past the snow, past the years that brought him here. "I have left people before," he said slowly, "and it haunts me still." Woman looked up at him, her silver blue eyes shining in the firelight, not human but full of the same pain and tired strength. "What is your name?" she asked. "Jake. Mine is Rinya, and my daughter is Alira. She was born in the dark sky between stars. She has never seen a warm home, never walked on grass, never tasted fruit. She only knows hiding and running and cold." Jake looked at the child again, her small face peaceful for now, but marked with silent suffering. "Why were you running?" he asked again, not with anger, just with tired curiosity. Rinya took a long breath, her shoulders low with weight. "We come from a planet called Virel, a place once full of light and music, now broken by war. Our leaders promised peace but built weapons in secret. Then came fire from the sky and blood in the streets. I ran with my daughter before the final attack. We found a ship with others, all fleeing. We thought we were safe, but something followed us, shot us down. We crashed here. The others are gone, only we remain." Jake listened without speaking, every word echoing something inside him, something old and buried. "My people believed in stars and knowledge, not killing. We were scientists, builders, teachers, but war turned us into numbers on a screen, targets to erase." Rinya said, her voice low like a wind through empty trees. She pulled something from her coat, a small glass circle glowing faintly. Inside were tiny lights moving like a galaxy. "It is a memory disk," she said. "It holds stories of our people, songs of home, names of those lost. We carry what little we have left." Jake took the disk in his hand, felt its gentle hum. "This is worth more than gold, more than anything," he said softly. "It is not for sale," she replied quickly. "It is for Alira, so she knows who we were, not what war made us." Jake nodded it back, careful not to damage it. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he had not felt in years. Respect. Outside the wind howled louder, a sign that the storm was growing stronger. They had to stay inside longer, which meant more danger if anyone was tracking signals or he. Jake stood and checked the old walls, sealed a crack with cloth and tape. Every sound from outside made him pause. Every shadow made him reach for his weapon. Rinya watched him, then spoke again. "You do not speak like the others. You do not look at us with fear, because I have seen worse." Jake said, "I was once a soldier on Earth when the colonies fell and the skies burned. I saw humans become monsters and machines cry like men. I left when I could not take it anymore. I came here to disappear." She looked at him with new understanding. "Then you are not just kind, you are broken too. We all are." Jake replied and sat down again, the fire now just glowing embers. Alira moved slightly, her eyes blinking open. Slowly she saw her mother and smiled a small, weak smile, then turned her gaze to Jake. "Are you staying?" she asked, her voice soft and tired. Jake looked at her, then at Rinya, then back at the fire. "For now, yes, I am staying." "Lyra, closed her eyes again, holding the cloth in her hand, and whispered thank you. Then something outside cracked like ice breaking under weight. Jake stood quickly, heart racing. The wind had not made that sound. Rinya held her daughter close, her eyes wide and alert. Jake moved to the door, opened it. Just a little snow blew in, and he saw nothing, but the feeling was clear. They were not alone. Someone or something was out there watching, waiting, hidden in the snow, and the cold outside was no longer the only danger they faced. The snow fell harder than before. The wind screamed like an old ghost, dragging cold fingers across the wooden cabin. The fire inside had turned to red embers, barely glowing, the warmth fading fast as night took over the frozen land. Jake stood near the door, eyes sharp, breath slow, hand resting near his weapon. He had heard something, not the wind, not the creak of wood, something else, something moving outside, careful and quiet, like it did not want to be seen. He opened the door just enough to peek out. Snow swirled in the air, blinding and white, but still he saw it, a shape low and fast sliding behind a broken fence. Gone in a second, but it was there, he was sure of. Ith stepped outside, boots sinking into thick snow. The cold hit him like a wall, but he kept moving, slow and alert. The shape was not large, not heavy. The prints it left were strange, not human, not alien-like. Rinya and Alira, something different, with too many toes and no heel, like a crawling creature that never stood tall. He followed the trail around the cabin. The prints circled twice, then vanished near a tree, as if the creature had jumped or flown or disappeared into the storm. Jake turned back and paused. Something was wrong. He looked up. The cabin door was open wider. Then he left it, and the light inside flickered like a warning. He ran back, heart pounding inside. He found Rinya holding her daughter tight. Both were awake, both looked afraid. Alira was whispering something again, and again, her voice shaking, not from cold, but from fear. They found us, she said over and over. They found us. Jake locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle, checked the windows, checked his weapon, checked the corners of the room. His body moved like it remembered danger from long ago. What is she saying? He asked, looking at Rinya, who held her daughter like she might vanish. She sees things before they happen. Rinya said, sometimes only minutes before, sometimes days. She saw the crash, she saw the fire, she saw the hunters too late. Jake stared at the child, whose eyes were wide and glowing faintly in the dark cabin. She pointed to the wall, not saying a word. Now her hand shaking slightly. Jake turned and saw it, the smallest hole in the wall near the floor, barely visible unless you looked close, and from that hole a light blinked, once red and fast, then gone. He dropped to his knees and looked through the hole. Saw only snow and trees, but the blinking had not been his imagination. He had seen that light before, back when drones patrolled war zones, marking targets before airstrikes. He turned back to Rinya. Your enemies, do they use machines to track you? Yes, she said, but we thought we were safe here. The snow should block the signal. Then how did they find you? He asked. And then he understood. The fire, the heat signature in the cold, the warm metal, the radio static from earlier. All of it was a beacon to whoever was looking. Jake stood quickly through snow over the fire until the last glow died, then covered the windows with blankets and cloth, grabbed his pack and pulled it tight. We have to leave now, he said, low and serious. If they know you are here, they will come soon, and they will not knock. Rinya looked at Alira, whose eyes were now closed again, but her breath was quick, shallow, like she was sinking under water. She is too weak to walk far. Rinya said, I cannot carry her through snow like this. Jake looked around then at the old sled near the wall, broken, but not useless. He grabbed it, fixed the rope with wire, patted it with blankets, then lifted Alira gently onto it. She did not wake, but she held the cloth tighter than before. He turned to Rinya and nodded. She nodded back, silent and ready. Jake pushed the door open. Snow rushed in like a wave, but he stepped into it without fear. The sled behind him, the two figures wrapped in blankets close together, one human, one alien, both hunted by something that moved like a shadow and saw like a god. They moved through the trees, slow but steady, the wind louder now, like a scream across mountains. But behind that wind another sound began to grow, soft at first, then clearer, a hum, mechanical, cold, exact. Rinya Stopped and looked back, eyes wide. They are near, she said. Jake pushed faster, heart racing, the sled bouncing. In the snow they reached an old trench, a place from the last battle years ago, full of metal bones and lost things. Can hide here for now, he said, and jumped into the trench, pulling them down just as something passed overhead. A drone, black and round with red eyes, scanning the snow. Slow and steady it hovered, paused, then flew on, but not far. Jake held his breath. Rinya did not move. Alira did not wake. Then a second sound came, deeper than the first, not flying but walking, heavy metal footsteps. In the snow, something large approaching from the north side of the forest. Jake gripped his weapon, eyes on the dark trees, whispered to himself, not again, not like before, not this time. In the silence of the trench, Rinya reached out and touched his arm gently. You are not alone now, she said, and her words were not fear, they were hope. The footsteps grew louder, the shadows moved closer, and in the dark something whispered their names. Asterisk. The trench held stillness, like a breath before a scream. Snow falling slow above it, blanketing broken metal and old bones, the past hiding beneath the present. As Jake crouched low, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees, waiting for what would come next, Rinya sat beside him, holding Alira close, her arms wrapped around the girl like armor, her face quiet, but her fingers trembling each second, stretching longer than the last as the deep thudding footsteps came closer, shaking the snow loose from frozen branches above. Jake knew that sound, knew it from years ago on battlefields soaked with blood. It was the march of war machines, two-legged scouts, built by many, worlds used now by few, deadly precise, with no mercy inside. He peeked over the edge just enough to see its shape, black metal taller than a man, glowing red panels down its sides, scanning for heat, movement, life, anything that could destroy or drag away. Jake dropped back down, heart pounding. He reached for his bag, pulled out an old jammer, barely working, patched with wire and faith. He placed it in the snow between them, switched it on, and hoped it would buy them seconds, if not minutes. Rinya whispered something in her language, then looked at him, her eyes full of fear and fire. If they take us, they will not ask questions, she said. They will erase us from sky and memory. Jake nodded once, his jaw tight. Then he looked at Alira, her skin pale, her breath shallow, a line of blue light pulsing under her neck like veins glowing from inside. What is that, he asked. She was born like this, Rinya said, her voice soft. Her light was once rare, now it is feared. They say that children who glow can connect to things, feel signals, speak to machines. They called it dangerous. They called her a threat. Jake looked again and saw her eyes opening slowly, silver and bright, her voice so small but clear. It is here. Jake grabbed the sled rope, pulled it slowly through the trench, moving away from the machine step by step, the metal above them groaning as it searched the wreckage, scanning for heat and sound and breath. He led them into a side tunnel, half collapsed, full of twisted beams, but just wide enough to crawl through. He moved first, clearing the way with hands and knees, the sled dragging behind, making soft scraping sounds that felt like thunder. In his ears, Rinya followed, pushing gently behind, keeping Alira warm with her own body, whispering calm into the child's ear, even as fear climbed up her throat like smoke. They moved like ghosts through the tunnel until they reached a broken wall, where cold air poured through a crack. Jake pushed it open enough to slip out, then helped them through one by one until they stood in the shadow of a fallen tower, its top buried in snow, its base cracked open like a wound inside the ruin. Jake found what he was hoping for, an old emergency shelter, half working, but strong enough to hold heat and silence. He sealed the door from inside, set the jammer again, placed the sled near the back, and sat down at last, breath shallow and tired. We cannot keep running like this, he said. They will not stop. Rinya looked at him and nodded. Then, we do not run, she said. Not yet. Reached into her coat, pulled out a small square device no bigger than her palm, glowing blue with symbols he could not read. This is why they hunt us, he said. Jake stared at it. The glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with Alira's breathing. What is Ida? Beacon, she said, but not like theirs. This one speaks to the lost, not the hunters. It calls to the hidden ships, the refugees waiting in silence across the stars. Jake leaned back, mind racing. If you use it, they will find you faster, he said. I do not, she said. They all die in darkness, waiting for hope that never comes. Jake looked at the child sleeping, her face calm in the heat of the shelter, her hands wrapped around the memory disk. Can it even reach them from here, he asked it. Can, if we reach the peak, she said. The old station still stands at the top of the ridge. If we send the signal from there, it might reach beyond the storm. Jake stood slowly, checking his blaster, his pack, his mind already climbing the mountain in his head. Then we go tomorrow, he said, early, before they come back with more air. Rinya nodded again, her eyes clear, her fear still there, but something new behind it. Thank you, Jake said nothing, only sat beside the door, watching the snow fall again. Outside, slow and endless, but far beyond the storm, behind the clouds, something else moved, blinking slowly like an eye opening for the first time in a long time. In the dark machine, the hunter paused its scan, turned its head, and heard something new. A rhythm, not of war, not of commands, but of a heartbeat, soft and distant, and it began to walk again, following the silence, not knowing it was walking into the truth. The sky began to shift from black to gray as dawn touched the frozen hills with pale light. The wind had not stopped howling through the dead trees, and the snow had not stopped falling, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, as if time itself had begun to count down. Jake woke with a start, fingers gripping the blaster before his eyes even opened. His soldier instincts never truly rested, even after years of silence and exile. He sat up, checked the shelter, then turned to look at Rinya, who sat awake, already watching the door, holding Alira in her arms. The girl still asleep, her chest rising slow and soft at his time. Rinya said, her voice low but steady, we must reach the station before they wake again. Jake nodded and stood up, pulling his coat tight, then checked the beacon device still glowing in her pocket, small and bright like a star trapped in glass. He remembered its purpose, remembered what Rinya had told him, that it could reach those still hiding, those still alive, waiting for a sign that someone somewhere had not given up. He packed quickly, slung his gear on his back, picked up the sled ropes, and looked down at Alira, whose eyes opened slowly, meeting his without fear. You are strong, he said without smiling, and she nodded once, then closed her eyes again, trusting him like she had always known him. They stepped out into the snow, the cold biting instantly, but their path was clear to the north, across the frozen river, then up the broken ridge where the old signal station stood, its tower still leaning like a crooked finger pointing to the sky. They moved fast but careful, staying low, moving through tree lines and shadows, Jake leading, Rinya pulling the sled behind, each step in silence, each breath sharp in the frozen air. As they crossed the river, Jake stopped, suddenly raised a hand. Something was wrong. The silence was too perfect, the wind too flat. He knelt, pressed his hand to the snow, and felt it, a faint vibration, not from machines but from footsteps. Far off but coming closer. He looked back, and Rinya understood without words. They had been seen or heard or followed. Either way, time was now their enemy. We go up now, he said, and turned toward the ridge. The slope steep, the ground cracked and icy, but they climbed, Jake carving steps into the snow with his boots, Rinya pushing the sled with strength he'd not expected from her small frame. Halfway up, Alira opened her eyes again, looking toward the top of the ridge, her voice small but strong. It is calling me, she said. The signal is close. Jake paused, turned to look at the child, whose skin glowed softly under the coat, her fingers twitching like they felt signals in the air, like her body spoke to the machines even before words could. They reached the top after hours of slow climb, their hands raw, their legs shaking, but the station stood before them, old, rusted, broken, but not dead. Jake opened the metal door, forced it wide with his shoulder, stepped inside, and saw it, the console still in place, dust covered and silent, but Rinya moved fast, placing the beacon on the panel, her fingers moving over the surface with memory and hope. She began to speak in her language, soft sounds that echoed through the metal walls as lights blinked to life one by one. Jake watched the screens flicker, old green lines forming shapes, signals, connecting paths opening. He stepped back, then turned, suddenly his ears catching something outside, movement, not wind, not snow, but boots and metal and breath. grabbed his blaster, ran to the door, looked down the ridge, and saw them dark figures moving up the slope, silent and fast, hunters in black. Armor, eyes glowing, weapons ready. He turned back inside. "We are out of time." Rinya nodded, just once pressed her hand to the beacon, and the console responded, a low hum rising in the air, followed by a deep pulse like a heart, like a drum, like a cry sent into space. "It is done," she said. "The signal has left this world." Jake looked at her, then turned to the door. Again fired his shot toward the ridge, not to hit, only to warn, to delay, to buy a few more seconds. Rinya lifted Alira from the sled, held her close, her voice full of calm despite the sound of boots getting louder on the stairs below. Jake looked at both of them for a moment, too long, then smiled without smiling. "You go down the back ladder," he said. "I will slow them down." Rinya opened her mouth to argue, but saw his face, saw the old fire in his eyes, the kind that does not burn for self, but for others. She nodded once again, then climbed through the back hatch, disappearing into the cold wind with her daughter in her arms and the beacon still glowing. Jake stood alone, now turned toward the front door, blaster ready, breath steady, heart loud as the first shadow stepped into view, and he whispered to the dark, "Not this time." And outside in the snow far below, a ship opened its eyes as it heard the call of the beacon, blinking for the first time in years, engines humming with new purpose. The forest behind the ridge was silent, not with peace, but with waiting. Snow fell slower here, like it was listening, like the trees were holding their breath as Rinya moved through the frozen undergrowth, carrying Alira close, her arms aching, her breath sharp, her feet slipping on ice, but her eyes fixed ahead. She did not look back, not once. She knew Jake was still there at the station, holding the hunters at bay, his shadow against the flames of war. One more time she whispered his name in her language, like a promise, like a thank you, like a goodbye. The signal had gone out, the beacon had spoken to the stars, but she did not know who had heard it or what would come, only that now the hunters would never stop, not until they had crushed the last light. From her hands a branch snapped ahead, low, not far, and Rinya stopped, her heart racing. She crouched behind a rock, her coat covering Alira, the snow hiding them both. Then she saw it moving through the trees, a machine walking not like the others, slower, older, but still alive, scanning the ground with red eyes, its metal body scarred, its legs cracked with rust, but still strong. Rinya closed her eyes, then opened them again, pulled a small device from her coat, held it tight, the override chip once used by engineers, now forgotten, now her only card. She stepped out from the cover and stood tall, snow swirling around her face, bare and bright. The machine stopped instantly, weapons locked on her chest, targeting systems warming up. Its voice came through static and metal. "Surrender. Subject identified. Classified dangerous. Order code red. Initiate capture." Imria raised the device, spoke a word in her language loud and clear, and the machine paused mid-step, its head turning, its eyes flickering as the code entered its core, like a song from an old dream. "Override accepted," came the voice, soft, now confused, now hollow, awaiting new command. She stepped forward slowly, snow crunching beneath her feet. She reached up, placed her hand on the machine side, and whispered another word, old and lost, the language of builders, not fighters. The machine responded, lowered its weapons, turned its body toward the path ahead, its voice now clear, now waiting. Directive received. Protect the carrier, locate the signal source, ensure survival. Rinya looked up at the machine, her face hard with sorrow and strength. "You will walk with us," she said, and the machine moved beside her like a shadow, like a wolf that remembered its old master. Together they moved through the forest, fast, now silent, now with Alira still sleeping, but glowing brighter, the signal still inside her skin, like fire, like memory. Then behind them a flash of light reached the sky, a flare red and sharp and cruel, and Rinya knew Jake had made his stand, knew he had fought until the last breath, but she could not stop, she could not fall now. They reached the edge of the cliff where the land dropped into a valley, broken and deep and full of twisted trees, where she remembered seeing the old escape tunnel marked on the map, stored in her memory chip, a place built by colonists long ago, a place forgotten by war. She Climb down slowly, the machine following each step like a giant, with careful feet helping where the ice cracked carrying. Alira, when her arms failed, the child resting now, but her breath stronger, her face warm, her light steady inside. The tunnel, it was dark and cold, but safer than the open snow, and here at last Rinya stopped, set her daughter down, lit a small light, and looked at the machine now, still now waiting. She placed her palm against its side and spoke again. This time not with commands, but with sorrow, with truth. You were made to kill, but you can choose to guard. You were built to follow, but you can choose to protect. The machine said nothing, but its red eyes turned soft like fire through mist, and it lowered itself to the ground, powering down, but watching always. Watching, Grinya held Alira close and closed her eyes, sleep coming not with fear but with silence and the knowledge that somewhere above, far in the sky, the signal was traveling, still moving faster than thought, carrying their names, their voices, their story. But far away, near the edge of space, a message returned to shape, moved. A ship woke from sleep and turned its engines toward the frozen planet, its scanners reaching down, its heart beating like thunder. And near the wreckage of the old station, where fire still burned and smoke still climbed, one of the hunters knelt beside a mark in the snow, a trail leading into the forest, a path not cold enough to be dead, a path still warm. They are not gone, said the leader, eyes glowing through his helmet. They have help, and the signal has been sent. Another hunter stepped forward, holding something in his hand, something small that once belonged to Jake, now broken, now still. Then we end it before the others arrive, he said. They turned toward the trees, weapons ready, machines humming, as they followed the trail that never vanished, only waited. The stars above the valley were no longer silent. Some blinked with purpose, some moved like whispers across black space. The signal had reached them, and now they were coming, not with guns, not with fire, but with hope wrapped in steel and light below. In the cold dark of the hidden tunnel, Rinya opened her eyes slowly, her breath steady, her arms around Alira, who now sat awake, glowing softly, her small hands pressing against the wall, as if listening to something far away. The machine beside them still powered, low eyes, dim body, resting like a giant in sleep, but not unaware. Its systems humming with quiet energy, ready to rise when called, ready to fight or protect or follow. The voice of the girl who had once been called Dangerous, Rinya, reached for the beacon, pulled it close, placed it in Alira's hands. The child held it like it was made of glass, like it was alive, like she understood more than anyone what it truly meant. I can feel them, she said, her voice soft but clear. They are near, not far now. Rinya looked into her daughter's eyes, silver and deep like water that had seen stars and pain and still stayed calm. Then you must choose, she said, not as a mother, but as someone who had lived through war and fire and silence. Alira looked confused. Choose what, to light the sky or to stay hidden, said Rinya, to call them down now and risk being found, or to wait and let them pass by safe but blind. Alira did not answer. She looked down at the beacon, then at the tunnel walls, then at the sleeping machine, then back at her mother. If I call them, the hunters will find us, she said. Yes, and if I wait, they may never come back. Alira closed her eyes and listened the way only she could, the way she had done since birth, not with ears, but with her skin, her breath, her light. She heard the signals in the earth, the patterns in the snow, the broken voice of Jake fading into silence, but never gone. She stood up, small and shaking, but strong, her feet bare on the cold floor, her hands wrapped around the beacon, her glow brighter now, not soft, but sharp like a sunrise over ice. Then I choose, she said, and walked toward the end of the tunnel where the wall had cracked open, just enough for light to pass through. She knelt there, placed the beacon into the ground, pressed both palms against it, and whispered the words she had never been taught, but always known. The machine behind her stood at once, eyes turning bright red, scanning the walls, scanning the sky, systems coming alive, ready to defend what had just been chosen. The beacon answered her with a pulse that shook the tunnel, a hum that rose into the air, like a flare without fire, like a song only machines could hear. It raced upward, cutting through snow, through cloud, through silence, high Above in orbit, a ship turned its head, a cruiser from the old Alliance, black and gold, and worn but alive it locked onto the pulse and changed direction engines, burning hot eyes scanning the surface for the light that had called them back from exile. Inside the ship others waited, soldiers, doctors, refugees, all once lost, all once broken, now leaning forward, eyes wide, as the signal reached their hearts and told them there was still something left worth saving. But not all eyes were kind, not all signals were silent. The hunters had also heard the pulse, and now they ran faster through the forest, their weapons armed, their voices cold, their goal simple: find the source, end it before the ship could land, before hope could rise. The first of them reached the tunnel, found the tracks, the open crack, the heat still fresh from the beacon, and they moved in fast. Without pause, without words, inside the tunnel, the machine turned toward the sound, weapons unfolding from its back body, shifting into battle form, voice rising, protecting the signal, activating defense protocol. Rinya grabbed Alira, pulled her behind cover as the machine stepped forward, blocking the path, eyes burning like fire and snow. Then the first hunter appeared, raising his rifle, aiming without thought, without fear. The shot rang out, hit the machine square in the chest. Sparks flew, but it did not fall. It stepped forward, slammed into the wall, causing snow and ice to crash down, sealing the tunnel behind the girl and her mother. Buying time with its body, with its choice. Outside, the ship roared closer, breaking clouds, slicing air, a light from its belly sweeping across the forest, across the mountain, finding the beacon and locking on inside the sealed tunnel. Alira held her mother tight, listened to the machine's final sounds fading behind the ice, her face calm, her choice made. And then the light came down, not to destroy, but to lift, not to burn, but to find her and carry her and Rinya upward, away from the war, away from the cold, away from the lie that no one would ever care. They rose into the sky, wrapped in heat and silence and memory, leaving behind only snow and sparks and the whisper of a man named Jake, who once stayed behind so others could rise.